The dead don't blink. That's what my grandfather told me each time this holiday arrived. I always thought it was quite exaggerated and silly, both his warnings and the celebration itself, but he played the part of one who thoroughly believed in this ridiculous superstition. Sommerstide just isn't my thing. Even when I was a kid, after a certain age anyway, watching all of the other children get dressed up and running through the streets only exhausted me. My brother Gabe was all into it, so our family still held up our side of the gathering. There was no reason for me to deal with the bullshit if I didn't have to. I was born in Hollows Grove and was brought up on these idiotic traditions and rituals, but I never bought into it. Sure, when I was just a little tyke, I loved going door to door, gathering as many offerings as I could and trading them for all sort of goodies around the blaze. It didn't stick, though. The more my folks and just about any other brainwashed moron around these parts tried to drill into my head how sacred this time of year is to the town, the more I grew exhausted by it. I've never been afraid of the dark, never been superstitious, and never fallen victim to silly theories of terrifying things that could happen if rules aren't followed properly. A lot of the old folks don't necessarily take part in the gathering anymore, of course. They still flap their jaws about how vital it is that everyone else walks the line to precision. I don't know if they don't have to join in, having earned freedom from the silliness of it all after a certain age, or if they just enjoy messing with the kiddos. Either way, the seniors revere this shit more than anyone. Most of the gullible assholes around here buy into all of it. Even if mine is one of the only houses in town that doesn't have its porch light on when the sun goes down, I couldn't give a flying rat's taint what anyone else says, nor would I even allow myself to entertain this local folklore bullshit. That used to be the case, anyway, before the new door appeared in my home. I moved out of my folks' place a good decade ago, this year marking the 10th anniversary of my independence. I didn't pursue any further education after high school, nor do I have the best paying job, but I can generally afford everything I need. My house isn't big by any means, 1 level, 1 bedroom, 1 bathroom, but it has everything I need. I have a garage which mostly serves as a storage space, but no basement nor attic, just a living room, kitchen, small dining nook, bedroom, bathroom, and laundry room. Yeah, plus a few closets scattered here and there. 3 closets to be exact. 3 doors to 3 closets. 1 door to the bedroom, 1 to the bathroom, 1 to the laundry room, my front door and back, and 1 leading from the house to the garage. That's 9 doors in all, which still feels abundant for such a small, compact home now that I say it out loud. Still, too many entrances and exits in a lowly bachelor pad or not, I knew each and every one of them. I could walk the length of my house blindfolded and reach everything I needed with ease. Every one of those excessive doors were as normal and natural to me as my own feet and fingers. So when I noticed the new door etched upon the wall just a few feet from the entrance to my laundry area, I could barely pry my eyes from it. Given that I only wash my clothes maybe once a week, or once every 2 weeks if things haven't been too busy, I don't often visit that spot. Yeah, my house isn't especially spacious, but that room is nestled in the far corner, out of sight, out of mind and all. I'll catch a glimpse of it through my periphery at times when I'm heading out to the back deck to smoke a bowl, and I try to ignore it given my inherent ability to procrastinate my laundry as much as humanly possible. But I don't pay much attention until I commit to being a responsible adult for a change. On top of that, I often leave many of these doors open, unless I'm having company. Feeling less than motivated most days, I see no reason to close them, leaving easy access to whatever suits my fancy, with no barriers blocking the path. My walls and doors are a fairly drab off-white. They may have been a cleaner shade at some point, but they have been fairly muted and yellowed since I moved in. This new, mysterious entrance, however, was a far more vibrant shade. Still that same neutral tone, but it didn't look like it was layered in faded paint. It didn't exactly look like wood either. It had a similar texture, swirls and lined indentions and all, but it didn't appear to be fabricated, if that makes sense. It was more like whatever the material was grown into that very shape and form, like it was born to be a door. Yeah, I know, it sounds like I'm overreacting or reading too much into a simple fucking door. That's how it appeared to me. Standing in its direct vicinity, I didn't feel like I was alone in an otherwise vacant home, as though there was another presence in the room with me, one that was well aware that I was staring it down with my back twitching and my fingers trembling. Most Sommerstide days, I would stay locked up in my home like a hermit, avoiding even ordering pizza or risking interacting with any of these batshit crazy townsfolk, but not this one. I didn't even try to open the door or get close enough to fully investigate it. I just snatched up my keys, damn near sprinting for the exit. As I drove around aimlessly, I convinced myself that this had to be some sort of elaborate practical joke. I don't have many friends, but my old high school buddy John did have a tendency to fuck with me on occasion. Plus he knew how I felt about this silly celebration and the ridiculous superstitions. He had a key to my place too, which I had given him back in the day when his girlfriend kicked him out after a messy fight. I didn't call him to inquire about it though, only allowed myself to accept that this was the explanation. I don't know if I didn't call him on it just to avoid giving him the satisfaction, or if I was more afraid that he didn't do this. I just didn't want a reason to let this get under my skin any more than it already was. Plus, with the neighborhood kids already on the search for their offerings to feed the fucking flame, I wanted to get back to the comfort of my home, even if it didn't feel all that comfortable right now. I picked up some food while I was out, mostly to avoid having to enter my kitchen with the laundry room door and his new partner glaring at me from the back wall. It was absurd carrying on like a skittish child, and I know that, but I can't deny that this situation had me shaken. When I got back to the house, I flipped on the TV, ran to my kitchen to grab a couple of beers, not so much as glancing at the rear wall, and cozied up on my couch to enjoy ignoring the ongoing festivities outside. I cranked the volume up to be able to pretend I didn't hear the knocks as costumed kids came looking to gather hazelnuts I didn't have, and settled in to enjoy my night alone. Of course, even with the sounds echoing from my television practically shuddering the drywall, it didn't take me long to realize that the knocks I was attempting to ignore were not exclusively coming from the entrance to my home. I cranked the volume even louder, chugging down one beer, popping the other cap, and slurping that one back too. The knocking grew more constant, still ringing out more loudly than my speakers were even capable of muting. I wouldn't acknowledge it, no matter how much I felt inspired to shriek my demands for it to stop. Staggering to the kitchen once more, I grabbed the remaining 4 beers from one of the 6-packs, still refusing to so much as glance in the direction of the door that shuddered through my periphery. 2 more cans drained down my gullet, and the loopy sensation was beginning to kick in. While I had hoped this would make the assault on both the front and the mysterious door to grow more tolerable, it had only inspired the opposite.
"Feed the flame,"
echoed from outside with another slam against the entrance. When the same phrase called out from the rest of the house, from behind the door that had not existed yesterday, the can I was holding almost slipped to the carpet. Though the voice from my front patio was that of a child, a pleasant and friendly, yet clearly disappointed tone, the one from within these walls was far more graveled and monotoned.
"Feed the flame, mister,"
accompanied by another heavy knock from beside my laundry room, as the pounding from outside fell silent. The calamity beyond my walls quietened substantially, leaving only the occasional and far shorter tapping on the interior door. Each knock came in 3s, followed by more pleas to be granted
"Come on,
entry.
mister. Feed the flame."
I turned the volume back down. Not only was it causing my ears to ring, but my inebriated equilibrium to quake a little bit. But it didn't drown out even the far lighter rapping against the wood.
I know you're in there, guy. Just give me my offerings and I'll go.
I still wouldn't reply, nor would I get up from my couch. I just glared at the screen, pretending, begging to convince myself that I didn't hear anything besides the movie I wasn't entirely watching.
Feed the flame.
I tapped the volume button again.
Feed the flame, mister.
I chugged my 5th beer, cracking open the 6th.
Feed the flame!
Every single door, within and without, began to shudder, sounding as though they were being beaten by battering rams, rather than a child's knuckles.
Feed the flame! Feed the flame!
Over and over, unrelenting, the pounding against the doors would not stop, even when the walls began to vibrate, cracking the ceiling above my head. Voices called out from behind every door now, inside and out, all in different tones and voices. Some almost light and friendly, with cute little giggles. Others sounded like they belonged to the devil himself, gargled in strained words, almost howling, rather than speaking them.
You fucking piece
Through
of
all
shit.
of those in the chorus, though, none was as prominent as that croaking and almost bored-sounding voice from behind the mysterious entrance. I finally couldn't take it anymore, screaming at the top of my lungs, begging for the shrieking voices and pounding to stop. But it wouldn't stop. It wouldn't even pause for long enough for me to gather my bearings. I got to my feet, struggling to remain standing. Whether that was due to me being 4 sheets to the wind by this point, or the veritable earthquake shaking my little house to its foundation, I wasn't certain. Likely both were a significant factor, truth be told. My trembling legs felt like they would give out as I staggered to the exit of my home, the screaming voices still howling from all around me. I practically fell against my front door before I could wrap my fingers around the knob, but after pushing back from the wood and holding on to the frame, I managed to grip the shiny brass sphere. The second I turned the knob, creaking open my hopeful escape from this madness, the house fell silent and still once more. My ears were ringing, while my skull pulsed with a throbbing pain as I remained hunched over, leaning against the doorframe. I was battling not to retch across the threshold or upon some innocent costumed kid awaiting an offering, while I fought to regain my composure. My heavy breathing dissipated, slowly at first. My eyelids still firmly shut, I began to rise again, straining my back and gently drifting my eyes back open. Taking what was intended to be one last glance to my rear, halfway expecting to see my living room demolished as I blindly pulled open my exit, I was almost stunned to see that not even my beer had tumbled from the coffee table. Nothing appeared out of sorts in the least. Everything was quiet and peaceful, even the outside world, which was behind my back at the time. With my somewhat inebriated state, and my chaotic mind still reeling from the calamity of those insane moments, I had allowed my guard to drop, something that almost cost me my life. Had my reflexes been any more weighed down by the booze, and the sheer madness that inspired me to flee my home, I may have been unable to stop myself before I walked out. As it was, when my eyes met the blackened pitch of the apparent void which had seemingly consumed the world beyond my walls, I almost stumbled right over the threshold. My footing faltered as I attempted to make my exit, my intoxicated hands frantically reaching for the doorframe once more as I stopped in my tracks. Gazing slack-jawed at the absolute nothingness surrounding my humble house, with only complete and utter silence around me, I began to hyperventilate, the quickening dizziness damn near sending me falling into it. My shivering legs began to back me away from the absence of life outside, my tremoring hand gently shutting the door. I just stood there, gazing wide-eyed at it, my mind still in full panic mode, attempting to rationalize what I had witnessed. For a moment, as I reached out for the knob again, set to reassure my frenzied thoughts that I wasn't just seeing shit, I was certain that I was going completely mad, that my marbles were pouring from my limp open jaw while my extremities still spasmed. Seeing that same endless darkness out there, I gently closed the door, my spasming fingers rattling the knob they held. Standing there, glaring at the drably painted wood, I begged my lungs to settle down. Once I achieved some semblance of composure, I softly backed away from the door. I was still almost paralyzed as I still stared at the closed entrance that sealed away the nothingness from my sight. My legs felt gelatinous while my every inch spasmed and twitched uncontrollably. It wasn't until the unsettling silence was broken by 3 more knocks emitting from the door somewhere behind me that I lost my ability to remain upright. Whimpers moaned from my trembling mouth as I slowly turned my body on the floor, reluctantly staring toward the darkness at the rear of my home. Another trio of knocks, each one inspiring me to twitch as I sat rooted to the floor. They almost sounded gentle and friendly, innocent in a way, a soft and inviting beckoning to be granted entry through a fucking door that didn't exist the day before. It kept repeating every 30 seconds or so, and I just knew that it would not relent until I allowed myself to see who awaited me back there. Again, attempting to regulate my breathing and spasming limbs, I crawled across the carpet, wrapping my fingers around my waiting beer the second I was within range. I chugged down its remnants as I battled to break myself from the ground. Swaying from one side to the other as I reached a standing position, I leaned against my couch, allowing my equilibrium to normalize, the gentle knocking still persisting while I forced my lungs to calm. I didn't flip the lights back on as I approached the mysterious entryway, the fear of what may lurk behind, overruling my desire to make out my surroundings. I stood before the door, just gazing upon it, while the tapping from the other side inspired my back to twitch with every strike.
Feed the flame, mister.
A muffled, childlike voice called out, causing my breath to catch in my throat. Okay, I said out loud, with a heavy sigh. The knob didn't squeal as I turned it, nor did the hinges creak in the slightest as I softly pulled the door ajar. I felt my lips separate as I glanced down to the small frame of a boy, maybe 8 or 9 years of age, wearing a dusty and stained gray business suit. His pale face was completely devoid of any color, as was his shaggy gray and white hair. The only aspect of him that appeared to have any sort of hue were the wide and eerily round eyes, which almost glistened with a bright turquoise as they glared up at me, as they gazed into mine, unblinking. The dead don't blink. We just stared at one another, my senses refusing to register that absolute darkened pitch surrounding him, just as it engulfed my home as I attempted to exit. All I would allow myself to reluctantly focus on was the vacant stare of the one who looked back at me.
Feed the flame,
he said, holding up his filthy pillowcase, which was otherwise empty. Whether mine was the first home on whatever route he was taking, or the only destination he had this night, was the least of my concerns at the time. What scared me more than anything else, given that he had taken, well, something of a back road to reach me, was that I had nothing to offer him. I don't have anything, I said through trembling words.
Feed the flame, mister.
I'm sorry, kid. I don't have an offering." He just glared up at me, his arms dropping limp to his sides, and a scowl forming across his spherical and lifeless eyes.
"Feed,"
he said, his voice growing deeper and more graveled. "The flame." I can't help you, kid. I'm sorry. I just...
Feed the fucking flame.
I backed away, fumbling to close the door in his face, but I couldn't command my hands to perform the task of which I begged them. I don't have anything. He paced through the entryway as I continued to back away from him, shaking my head in denial of what I was witnessing, in denial of those wide eyes cutting through mine directly into my skull. "The dead don't blink, you ignorant prick," the voice in my head mocked. He followed every step I took, my feet practically stumbling over themselves, while his footfalls were far more confident as his pillowcase dragged the floor behind him.
Feed the flame.
"I can't! I don't have anything for you!"
"But you do, though,"
he said, stopping in place, a sinister smile almost splitting his face in two. My feet betrayed me, sending me toppling to the carpet. The boy let out a hollow chuckle, pointing his finger at me while I still attempted to shuffle myself away from him. What the hell do you want from me?" I begged as he finally stopped in place.
"Well,"
he said, his unsettling grin replaced by an almost studious expression, while his voice reverted to something far more carefree.
"to answer your question, I only want what's owed."
I just glared into his wide gaze, my grandfather's words still echoing from the back room in my mind, while his voice grew more akin to a fucking accountant than a batshit crazy little boy who appeared through a non-existent door.
"You see,"
he said, so matter-of-factly that I halfway expected him to pull out a damn spreadsheet.
"every home is responsible for at least one offering. Your brother carried the weight of the responsibility you shunned in your youth. But since you moved out on your own, well, you have been lacking, haven't you?"
I'll go gather some. I'll go right now. Just let me out and I'll...
10 years.
he shouted, his expression unchanged.
"For an entire decade, your home is offered nothing."
I'll get them. I just need...
No.
he screamed, shuddering my house to its foundation again.
"That's not good enough."
But I don't have anything to offer.
"We're not interested in a handful of nuts, buddy boy. It's too late for the, traditional tribute."
Please, I didn't know. I didn't... My words were cut short, as was my breath as he darted right at me, pinning me to the floor where I lay, pleading for forgiveness.
"Ignorance is no excuse,"
he said, his lips forming that twisted grin again.
10 years. That's 10 offerings, and you'll be all paid up.
Every single inch of me was shivering uncontrollably. The fact that I was currently sandwiched between the floor and the alarmingly strong kid only accentuated every tremble.
What's it gonna be?"
he said, darting his wide eyes across my spasming frame. With a primal scream which began somewhere around my knees, I think, I pushed against the kid with every ounce of strength I had left. He looked downright shocked as he tumbled to the carpet, while I wasted no time in gathering myself back up. He let out such a deep, guttural, and eerie chuckle as I began to sprint away from him that I could feel it shudder within my very core as the walls shook and the windows cracked from its volume. For a moment, I actually thought I could reach a weapon, one of the kitchen knives or even the gun in my nightstand, before he could react. Of course, that was borderline rational thinking, real-world ideology which did not exist in homes at the center of an endless void, or in the presence of a nefarious little evil bastard. Before I could even escape from the room from which I had previously been backing away from the kid, I felt my body collide with the hard ground again, face first onto the carpet. Before I could even think about spinning around or attempting to fight back, I felt such an unexpected, agonizing, and near paralyzing pain that my fracturing mind could barely comprehend what was happening. The horror practically crippled my senses when my eyes honed in on the source of this torment. Though I had been in so much shock that I didn't even feel my shoes and socks being stripped away, they were far from my focus when my eyes met the blood-soaked mouth of the demented child as he pulled back, tearing my big toe from my foot, spitting it to the floor as he gazed back at me.
That's one,
he said, crimson lining every tooth as he smiled back at me. I screamed out with everything I had, begging for my neighborhood to re-emerge beyond my front door, pleading for someone, anyone to save me from my next offering. I tried to kick the little shit with the foot that was not gushing fluids to the carpet, but his reflexes were much faster than my own, as was his strength. He caught it by the ankle before I could even hope to make contact, before he let out a squealing cackle that could shake the pillars of hell itself. Glaring back at me again, he whipped the shoe and sock from that foot, while I attempted to figure out any way to prevent him from claiming the next tribute. I almost thought about swatting him with my hands, but I wasn't prepared to offer those up as well, so I just kept trying to kick him with the foot spewing my bodily fluids from its gaping holes. Of course, my meager assault was all but useless against this monstrous thing. The boy did not break my gaze for a second as he pinched the pinky toe between his slender fingers, twisting it from one side to the other, turning and twisting it until the bone shattered and the flesh tore, peeling the oozing digit away like the head of a fucking gummy bear.
this little piggy went wee, wee, wee all the way home.
He shrieked, cackling that maddening wail of a laugh. I finally made contact with my foot against his jaw, feeling it crunch beneath its heel. Though it didn't interrupt his mad laughter, it did allow me to slip free. For a moment, anyway. As I shuffled across the ground, the shock thankfully muting the agony screaming from my quickly leaking feet, I once more begged for any semblance of an escape. I began to crawl across the carpet as I couldn't even think about putting pressure on my wounds at the time. But again, I hadn't a hope of getting away from the crazy little shit.
Only 8 more to go,
he said, his graveled voice far more somber, yet increasingly sinister with every word.
You can make this a lot easier on yourself if you just let it happen. You know that, right?
Once more he was on me before I had a chance to react, snatching my left hand from the floor, sending my face planting to the carpet.
Let's knock out a few this time, huh?
He said, gripping my ring finger and pinky with one hand, and the remaining 2 in the other. Please don't. I begged, but my words fell on deaf ears. With another echoing crunch, he yanked his hands to the side, splitting the gripped fingers in opposing directions. As he twisted both hands again, tearing the tissue and bone apart, he pulled back, peeling 3 fingers from the hand, the remaining forefinger slipping free due to the copious amounts of blood pouring through the torn flesh. I just glared down at my hand with its pristine yet scarlet-shaded thumb and grizzled forefinger barely hanging on by split tissue and skin, barely able to breathe.
We're halfway there, fella,
the boy said, dropping my digits to the blood-soaked carpet. No more, I pleaded, but he wouldn't even acknowledge my begging.
May as well let me have that finger.
He shrugged, gesturing to the one dangling from my ruined hand.
Ain't no saving that.
Whether it was the way he spoke, his words, his spiteful gaze, or just the shock and horror, I felt my fear transform into a rage I had never before known. Biting down as I sat upright, I clutched my remaining, fully fingered hand around the useless finger, letting out a near primal scream as I twisted and pulled it free, tossing it at the little brat's face.
There you go,
he said with a wink. The dead don't blink. Do they wink? I thought, my reeling mind seeking anything other than the agony to occupy it. My momentarily wandering thoughts were not enough to distract me from the wrath blossoming within me like a fucking dandelion pushing through a split in the concrete. I practically launched myself from the floor, toppling upon him, hoping to Christ he was something actually tangible. I reared back, thrusting what remained of my left hand against his chest, pulling with all my force to hold him down as I beat my fist against his face. His blank stare did not falter as I pounded his little skull, nor did any fluids leak from his mouth or nose. That didn't stop me, though. As he lifted his left hand, appearing to reach for my head, likely to claim an ear for tribute, I grabbed his tiny mitt by the wrist. "You want a fucking offering?" I squealed, drooling crimson from my gaping mouth. "I'll give you a goddamn tribute!" Wrapping my mouth around his tiny fingers, I bit down with the full force of my trembling jaw, feeling them crunch beneath my teeth. Well, he didn't make a sound as I whipped my head from side to side like a playful fucking puppy with his favorite squeaky toy. I continued to shriek my maddening wail through the cracks as I pulled back. Spitting the 3 fingers I brutally amputated to the floor, panting and gagging from the gory act I had just committed on a fucking child, even if it was a ghost kid. I almost felt ashamed as we glared at one another.
Not bad,
he said, a sneaky smile crossing his lips as he held his hand before his face. He flexed his remaining pinky and thumb before splaying out all 4 fingers, which seemingly regrew within seconds at most. I felt my heart sink for a moment before glancing back down to see the digits I had removed still laying on the floor.
I'll give you those. You earned 'em fair and square,
he said, his expression almost proud in a bizarre fashion.
But that still only takes you to 9.
No, I whimpered, flopping back to the floor, gasping for breath.
And don't even think about trying that shit again, or the next offering will be your head.
Those words were spoken so free of emotion or energy, so blank and so empty that I did not doubt them for a second.
So, what's it gonna be?
You're giving me a choice? I said, both exhausted and disgusted.
Why not?
He said with a chuckle.
I mean, I was gonna take an eye, or, go more traditional.
Traditional? I asked, suddenly feeling my breath catch in my throat, once I compared which body part would more closely match the more commonplace annual offerings. The boy just winked again, that sinister smile spreading across his lips once more.
One thing, though. If you make the choice what your last offering will be, you gotta remove it yourself. Leave it up to me, and I'll make it fucking hurt.
I just nodded, my whole body trembling as I began to lift myself from the moist carpet, drenched in my bodily fluids. It was no easy task hobbling back to the kitchen, hopeful that any of my knives were sharp enough to slice through the tissue and bone with as little resistance as possible. For the briefest of moments, as I slid the cleaver from the wooden rack, I considered attempting to put up a fight again, to attempt freeing myself from surrendering more of the remaining lifeblood my body held. But as I gazed back at the boy, the single shake of his head he offered assured me that this would be a fool's errand at best. I was weakening more by the second as my life continued to leak from my numerous wounds, but I hoped I could make it through this. I hoped that I had enough strength left, not only to make this one final tribute, but to return to the real world, and the hospital only miles away. At first, I considered lopping off the pinky of my right hand, but I could not even hope to wield the blade in what remained of my left. Besides, I didn't need to lose any more fingers, even if I rarely had much use for that one. Lowering myself to the tiled floor, grunting as I shifted into position, I splayed out the foot that still had a big toe. The one next to the missing pinky toe would be my target, but with my vision blurring and my limbs trembling, my aim was dodgy, to say the least. I just propped the blade upon the outstretched toe, holding it in place to the best of my ability. Raising my other shivering foot, attempting to regulate my hastened pulse, I slammed the heel down, slipping on my own blood as I made contact. Regardless of the shock and existing pain, the agony was sublime as the sharpened steel passed through my flesh, my stumbling causing me to slice through not only my target, but the one next to it as well. I howled out louder than I had yet, my eyes crossing as I wrenched across the tarnished appendage and the pool of crimson surrounding it. I looked to the boy as I swayed in place, a series of blackened dots invading my vision. Before I had the opportunity to ask if we were done here, if this was enough and if my debt was paid, I lost all reason and the ability to remain conscious, falling into darkness as my face smashed to the blood-soaked tiles. When I awoke to the sound of tiny fists hammering against my front door, I was completely lost at first. My senses steadily returning, I allowed myself to believe that I had only experienced a vivid and brutally haunting nightmare. That was, of course, until my eyes focused on the sight of my bandaged foot splayed out across the stained but otherwise clean tiles. I peeled back the gauze wrapped around my left hand, my jaw unhinging at the vision of the black threads sealing the stumps of my missing fingers. My clothes were still stained in the crimson spilled from my wounds, but every single rip and tear had been mended, as much as possible given the circumstances.
I took the time to clean you up while you were out.
A friendly voice uttered from my left. When I turned to see the pale-faced boy sitting cross-legged across from me, those shimmering turquoise eyes looking back into mine, I felt my heart and guts leap into my throat. "Why are you still here?" I asked in a whimper.
We ain't done yet, I'm afraid.
"But you said you needed 10 offerings. You have 10.
True,
He said with a smirk.
but you ain't exactly offered them up just yet.
"What?"
Come on,
he said, getting to his feet and holding his hand out to me.
we gotta get moving before they put the fire out.
I just glared at his outstretched hand, trying to figure out if this was just another trick. Did he want me to offer up my prominent hand now? If I took his hand, would he bite down the only fingers I have left? His expression was sincere and gentle, no malice hidden behind his kind eyes. But could I trust that? Regardless of my blood being trapped within my body again, I was still exhausted and weak, still loopy and unable to focus. I simply had nothing left. Fuck it, I thought, holding out my still whole hand, taking his in mine. With little effort, he practically tossed me to my feet, upon which I winced, swaying from side to side. It wasn't easy to stabilize myself with 5 last toes, but after a moment I gathered all the bearings I could, still holding his hand as he led me out into the night. Children were still coming and going, up and down the sidewalks and through the streets, but they paid us little mind as they went on about their business, only cutting me uneasy glances here and there. Every single step was agonizing and grueling, almost dropping me to the concrete below me, but the ghostly kid would not allow me to fall. As I stumbled, he wrapped an arm around my waist, holding me upright while we carried on. The minutes passed by slowly, each bloating to 5 or 10 times its natural length, but we plundered onward. With the pain blinding my senses and each breath feeling like a desperate accomplishment, I lost track of the concept of the passage of time. Passers-by dwindled as we passed into the opening to the still blazing fire in the town square. The crowd was still gathered around it as we weaved between and around them, the boy handing me his blood-drenched pillowcase when the warmth of the blaze caused the pain of each fresh wound to burn.
One by one,
he said as I took the makeshift bag from him.
Afraid I can't credit you for that extra toe, though.
Again, nobody paid much attention as I held the bag with my thumbed stump, reaching my more functional hand within. As requested, I offered each of my torn away and severed parts to the fire, one by one, feeding the flame with my flesh. As I watched my final offering being consumed by the fire, the middle finger I saw as a final fuck you to this wretched holiday, I turned my gaze back to where the boy had stood only moments before. It was no surprise to see him gone, nor to see the slack jaw of the elderly woman to my left cutting her eyes from my bandaged and oozing stumps to the blaze in which I tossed my missing parts. With an awkward smile and a winded shrug, I began my hesitant return trip, turning my back to the crackling flame. Once I was certain the boy had indeed faded from this reality once more, I pulled the phone from my pocket, the one I was quite thankful still lay within, and placed a call to the local hospital. As it turned out, it would seem that I was not the only victim of this godforsaken night, as they had no ambulances to send my way. But an hour or so later, after awaiting my taxi just on the outskirts of feeding the fucking flame, I was stumbling across the threshold of the unsurprisingly bustling hospital. With everything else they had going on, it took them some time to get to me, but a few blood transfusions and some more professional stitching and a lot of fucking questions later, I was finally headed back to my home. I was still apprehensive as I crept back inside, reluctantly hobbling to the rear of the house. The shaky and strained breath I exhaled upon seeing no trace of the mysterious door almost left me as lightheaded as the blood spewing from my gaping wounds only hours before. By this time next year, hopefully I'll be getting around a lot better than I am right now. It'll take some adjustments to get used to my new quality of life, but I'm just thankful to have survived this nightmare. One thing is for certain, though. Still hobbling or not, I will be the first in line at the fucking gathering field next Sommerstide. Yes, this fucking holiday can go straight to hell in a blood-soaked stump basket, but I will be damned if I'm coming up short on my offerings. Ever again.